and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
I'm here today with someone who, to me, definitely shows caregivers come from all walks of life. But she has a unique perspective, in my opinion, because she's not coming just from that caregiver perspective. She's coming as the legal side, the legal representative. And I wanted her to be able to come on because she has a totally different perspective to pretty much show us that in this caregiving world, one ingredient is key, and that's compassion. So, before we go on, I'd like to introduce Virginia Sampson. Good morning, Virginia.
Good morning, Jessica. Thanks for having me on.
Definitely. I was excited to have you on just because you have this unique perspective. You were a caregiver and basically for your husband. You had 4 young children, and you were also a caregiver for your mother. What was that like for you?
Well, they were very different experiences, obviously, but what I noticed with my husband was what kind of brought me to this journey is that I felt there was a real lack of compassion for him and me and for the children as we managed that difficult process. That kind of sparked my interest in compassion. And with my mom, it was a little bit different since she was older and she was in a community. There were other people that were in that situation. So I kind of had a little bit of a community there and some support. I also think we've come a lot farther in providing assistance to caregivers than we did when my husband was sick, because he was sick in, the mid-90s. So I think there's a lot more resources. I'm not saying that makes it easier. It isn't difficult. I'm not saying that at all. But there is a little bit more support than there was back then, I think, for caregivers. So it was not as difficult an experience with my mom for a variety of reasons, but still difficult.
Right. I think we all eventually get to the point as we learn as we go. And so I can see it getting better as time goes on. But I think even still now, there are scenarios that people are still responding. Maybe they come from their own self-interest. And so compassion gets forgotten, or we get too busy and we need things to happen fast, quick, and compassion is forgotten.
Yeah, I do think that we have become more me-centered in many ways for many different reasons. But I do think, yes, I think we've got more support, people targeted at supporting caregivers, but I'm not sure as a society we're more compassionate. I think that's been a struggle for us.
So when coming from your experience, I can only imagine that's what inspired you to write your book, Compassion Magic: Turning Tragedy into Triumph. How did that come about?
Well, it was years later. So it was when when we got the diagnosis of A.L.S. for my husband, my youngest son was just 2 weeks old. And so the book really wasn't written until he was about to go to college.
Oh, nice.
So it was a long period of time. I think the seeds were planted when my husband was sick, because I found people were not very compassionate. Like, my kids, particularly for my kids, and I'm sorry if I'm going to cry. It's still, after all these years, difficult to talk about, but people were very unkind to my children who were who were struggling with dealing with the loss of their father. And not only that, but watching him die this horrible death, right?
That's hard.
And so they were acting out in unhealthy ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eventually they ended up getting to drugs and alcohol, but they just were acting out at school, at, friends' houses. And so basically they were never invited to anybody's house. The teachers would basically tell them they were stupid and worthless, would never amount to anything. And it was just, and they all knew what was going on at home. It's not like it was a secret. I mean, I'm not like, we didn't go broadcast it, but, you know,
Right.
it was a smaller community and people knew, you know, that their father was dying. But still very few people, I should say. I mean, just a very small amount of people actually reached out to my kids to offer them any kind of comfort or compassion in that difficult time.
And that's something we all need to get through this, any type of caregiving approach. You absolutely need those people that you can connect with that are there to hear you vent if you need to vent, or just understand what you're going through and just be there for you. And with kids, I think it's even harder because they're not being heard. A lot of times those kids are dismissed because they are kids, almost as if, you know, they're too young to understand adult problems and set aside. And that's not fair for the kids, because we inadvertently teach our kids how not to be compassionate just in our actions in themselves.
That's so true. And I think, you know, someone could have just put their arm around them and said, you know, I'm sorry you're going through this. Just even small acts of kindness, right? Because, you know, I took them to some therapists when they got into bigger trouble. And, you know, they said, look, this is the way kids deal with things. They don't know how to deal with it the way we adults do. Not that we always did it in the best way either, and when they're ready to process their pain and their grief, they will. But in the meantime, kids, as adults do too, but more kids, they seem to engage in like self-destructive behavior. I think they just act out the pain in unhealthy ways that just make the situation worse for them and drive people away. And I think that's where the compassion part's in. If you're the adult and you see that happening, you know what's going on, I would think you would understand, you know, that's not really the way that child is. It's just that they're in pain.
Right.
And that can go for anything in life, whether you're losing a parent's getting divorced, you know, something going on in your family. Kids just act out pain in not necessarily what we would consider to be healthy ways. And they, as my dad used to say, kids need our love the most when they deserve it the least.
Right.
And I think that's so true.
Right. Yes, because when a kid is acting out, they're not just being kids. There's a reason, there's a source within them that is causing them to act out. And it takes that compassionate view, that person that's willing to look deeper and go to that child and say, hey, I'm here for you. Let's go down into this issue together.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we're not all therapists, right? We can't go out and solve these problems for these kids, but I think we can show them just a small kindness. I think I like my daughter, who was really mistreated at school by the teacher, said to me that what got her through it is she had one teacher that was kind to her, that would put her arm around her and say, I'm here for you. So small things can make a huge difference in a child's life.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes people are afraid to reach out and help because they think, oh, what am I getting involved in? It can just be a simple act of kindness. That may be enough to get that kid through the day. And so I'm suggesting to people that, you know, don't be afraid of what you may drag yourself into. You can set limits on it. But being just that simple act of kindness in everything we do can make a huge difference in a person's life.
Absolutely. And, you know, and as you do that simple step, I mean, it becomes a skill. And to me, compassion in itself is still something that you learn from. So you need people to provide those examples, and you get that learned skill. And then it's something that you begin to just do. You see people out, you know, it doesn't have to be family and friends and neighbors. You just see people out in general public, and you can recognize someone who needs help with something, or passerby, and not have that fear of, oh, if I speak up, if I say something, they may yell at me, or they may reject me, or I think that mental block to an extent keeps some people from being compassionate.
I agree. I think it's partly fear, right? I do think we get afraid of what's going to happen if we do that. Are we going to get too involved? Or, like you said, are we going to be rejected? Or, lots of things. But I think if you just bring it out of love from your heart to just reach out and be kind to someone, I think that it's always well received, even if they don't initially respond that way. I think it does resonate with them on some level. And like I said, compassion can be something simple. I mean, it's really seeing them in distress or in need of something and actually reaching out to help them. It can be something simple like opening a door or carrying a package or smiling at someone who looks like they're having a terrible day. So it can be very large things, but it can also be very simple things. And when you are kind and compassionate to other people, it's like a ripple effect, right? It's like a pebble in a pond. They've done a lot of research on this at universities like Stanford and UC Berkeley about compassion, its effects, and its effects on us individually as a society. But what they have established is that it does spread, right? It is a pebble in a pond, and it does have a ripple effect when you just do one simple act of kindness.
Right, right. And, and it's interesting you say it that way because especially in today's times right now, a simple smile goes so far, but with us having to wear masks for other reasons, our smiles are hidden. And, trying to do a thumbs up for people, sometimes it's kind of like, what are they doing? Why are they looking at me this way? And what does that mean? But to me, walking around, even in the grocery store, I had a moment 2 weeks ago when I was shopping in an H-E-B, and it was actually somewhat busy after the times that have passed. And there was a woman, we were in the area near the eggs and milk, and I was trying to wait my turn patiently, and so I can reach in and grab a dozen eggs. And she just looked over at me, and she just kept looking around like she was nervous. And then she finally just looked at me and said, I am going to reach for these eggs here. I'm not doing anything. I'm not trying to offend you. I'm just going to go for these. And I thought, that's weird. That's odd. And so I kind of motioned to her, thumbs up, sure, go ahead. And she got the eggs, put them in her cart. And as she was slowly starting to pass by me, she said, I'm sorry. It just seems like everybody's full of fear right now. And I thought, yes. And I'm smiling, mask on, but I'm smiling. And I thought, if only you could see, I hear you. I understand. My heart goes out to you. I know this is all so crazy, but she was responding. She said, I feel like I need to get out of here. And I said, yeah, I know. I'm trying to, maybe that's what it was. It wasn't that I was showing a lack of compassion. It was just that energy it felt like it was everywhere and that people were just afraid. So I got my eggs and had to get out of that area.
No, I know there is a lot of fear and you're even afraid to have conversations. Like I used to go to the grocery store and just ask the person, the cashier, how are you today? And, now everybody's even afraid to respond to that. But when this is over, I'd suggest the stories that I've heard from cashiers who are just having a bad day, if you really listen, I think it just lifts everyone's burden. But not only asking, but listening. You listened to what she said, right? You felt her fear. And that connection is so important. That you actually, what they tell you, you listen to and it resonates with you. I think that's very powerful. And sometimes you're right, we're busy and we'll just say something, but we don't ever listen to the response or look at what's going on with the person.
Right.
And that's part of compassion is being present, right? You have to be present for that person, not saying, oh, hi, how are you? Or what's going on in your life? And you're thinking about the 30 things on your to-do list, right? Which we all do. I'm certainly not judging or criticizing anyone, but I'm saying that's part of what being compassionate is being present as you were in the grocery store with someone so that you can connect with them.
Absolutely. And that's the moment when you see the kids screaming and crying, have the compassion for that parent. And even, okay, so we're using this word compassion, and it is a learned skill. So if we try to break this down a little bit more, what does compassion look like? We mentioned, it could be smiling, it could be opening the door for someone. I mean, acts of kindness. So you also had another book that came out for the children's perspective, and you have Superhero Sam in there. What does Superhero Sam try to teach the kids?
Well, Superhero Sam is it could be it's gender neutral and racially diverse story about a little boy or girl, Sam or Samantha, right, that is very unhappy because he or she feels like her parents are always busy and don't pay attention to him or her. And so he complains and he complains and he complains. And then he realizes one day the little light goes on in his head and he goes, wow, my parents do care about me. It's just that they're very busy. Maybe if I start helping them, they'll have more time to spend with me. And so he kind of transforms the family by starting to do kind things for his parents, or just initiating picking up his toys or cleaning up. And then he finds that his parents are in a better mood and they have more time for them, and they start to do some things together. And so as a family, they come together and spend more time together in a positive way. And his mom calls him I'm saying him just because that's easier, but calls him a superhero because he has been thoughtful and kind and compassionate with people.
Right. He starts to become somewhat of a leader for the family and leads by example.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he teaches his parents some things, right? Because obviously we get busy and we forget to spend time with our kids or be compassionate. And he reminds his parents too. And so his mom makes him a little costume and he's a superhero. And it's just a lesson, I hope, that resonates with kids and parents, that it is the little things, and it is, just simple acts of kindness and helping can transform a family, a community, whatever it may be.
Right, because I'm sure the family at that point can, using the term, pay it forward. You live it, you know it, you live it, you act it outwardly, and others see it, so others pick that up, and that pebble in the pond continues to go out.
Yeah, I think when we receive and it nurtures us, then we're more likely to give to others, for sure. I agree with that. And I think that's the thing, when we're very me-centered and we're only worried about ourselves, then that really isn't very nurturing. I mean, science has established this, right, that we are biologically programmed to be members of a community. I mean, that's the way we evolved. And so when we are compassionate with other people and we have a deep connection with them, it nurtures us emotionally. It actually has substantive changes in our physiology, and it's good for us mentally. And these are the things they've been studying. So there's huge mental health and physical health benefits of being compassionate, living compassionately.
Definitely. The interesting part about this is that when you come from the caregiver's perspective, it's like this, from what we were just talking about, has to be flipped. The caregiver now has to turn their compassion inwardly, and they now have to do things for themselves, because in the day-to-day basis, being able to maintain care for their loved ones, and that may be a spouse with the kids like you experienced yourself. It's not necessarily always just a parent. But that caregiver has to be compassionate to themselves and put themselves in a position where they think about themselves. They have to be kind to themselves. They have to, the things that they would do for their loved ones and everyone else, they also have to turn that back on themselves.
That's so right. And that's a lot of what the psychologists and the researchers have coined that, have called that self-compassion, right? And it is as important to our well-being, especially as caregivers. So let's face it, caregivers are probably already very compassionate people, or they wouldn't be caregivers.
Right.
So the challenge typically for the caregivers is to be self-compassionate and to show to themselves the same care and love that they show to the person that they're caring for. And that's so important because it keeps us healthy, it keeps us strong, but somehow we tend to feel that makes us selfish, right? If you're a caregiver, you feel like you have to do everything for anybody else, and at the end, everybody else, and then at the end of the day, there's nothing left. And that doesn't serve you or the person that you're caring for.
No.
And so when I speak about this to groups, and when I talk to them, I say, it really is, if you're going to continue to be a caregiver, you really have to nurture yourself. And there's some simple ways that you can do it, because, who has time? Caregivers don't have a lot of time and a lot of energy, right?
Right.
So there's some simple tools that these scientists have come up with that are ways that you can nurture yourself, but also you will reap the mental health benefits and the physical health benefits, because you need to stay mentally and physically healthy to be able to care for whoever you're caring for. And in my case, when my husband was gone, I had to, I had to continue on, right?
Yeah.
I had, 4 children, so I couldn't be totally depleted, even though I felt like that at the time. So I'm so glad you brought that up about the self-compassion. For caregivers, that's so essential.
Right.
It's not being selfish. It is essential to your well-being, but also to the well-being of the person you're caring for. You will be a better, more effective caregiver.
Absolutely. And that's the part of this that concerns me, is when they stop thinking about themselves and they stop coming from that self-compassion mindset. They themselves will be so run down, just as you said, that they will be exposed. It's like a pattern. You're exhausted, your immunity starts dropping, your hope, all of that just kind of falls to the wayside. And you eventually, you kind of almost, I don't want to say the word deteriorate, but it's like you're falling apart along with your care recipient. And by the time they're done and they transition on to the next area of life, you're still there without that strong foundation anymore. And so, then with the kids that you're having to take care of, or even continuing to take care of yourself, it's just that it's like a snowball that just keeps going and going and going. And it's hard to keep your head up. It's like at that point you're in that boat in the rough seas and you're trying to keep your head up above water. And we just get so overwhelmed with it. And it's amazing how it starts from that one little pebble, and the rest, if you can't keep that going, then the rest of it goes so quickly thereafter.
And that's so true. That's so true. And one of the simple tools I try to teach people is, if you're feeling in a moment of overwhelm, you can give yourself a hug. Because believe it or not, physical touching releases oxytocin, which is good for you mentally and physically. And if there's no one around to hug you, that's a really great, I have meltdowns. And I wish I would have known about this then, but you give yourself a hug. It's very comforting and very soothing. And like you said, you want to continue, because what happens if you can't care for that person, then who's going to care for them? Right? If your health deteriorates, or, guilt is a big part of caregiving, right? I'll never forget when my husband got sick, we had a conversation, and, it was like, I thought, how am I going to do this? I was terrified. And I just said to myself, I'm going to do the best I can. That's all I can do. And you feel, so whatever that is for you, your best. The problem is that we're going to have days when we're not at our best, right? And then you're left when your loved one is gone, or even while they're still around, with this huge guilt of, I snapped at them, or I didn't respond to this need, or I didn't do that. And self-compassion is about forgiving yourself for that too. But I think also your regrets will be less and the guilt will be less if you can maintain a level for yourself, to nurture yourself so that you stay at that certain, your best level as a caregiver. And I'm not saying you're going to be able to do that every day, but you know what I'm saying?
Right.
If you stay within your spectrum of, I'm doing the best I can, and some of that is going to be nurturing yourself and be compassionate with yourself, you're going to feel mentally better and feel like you have done the best for that person when you're no longer needed. And I think that's really important, because I've talked to caregivers that just are weighed with guilt afterwards about how they weren't the best caregiver, they didn't do this, and that's, you don't want to go there.
No.
So I think we're all going to have some of that, just because we're not perfect, right? We're not going to be perfect caregivers. We're not perfect parents. We're not perfect spouses, whatever it is. But I think that you can alleviate that a little bit if you care for yourself and keep yourself within a spectrum of, this is kind of acceptable caregiving behavior for me.
And I completely agree with that. And that's why I love the book from the children's perspective as well, with Superhero Sam, because if we don't know what it looks like and we can't model that for our kids, and in this case, ironically, it was the child that was modeling it for the family. When we don't know what that looks like, then how do we know when we have lost the compassion? So we have to be able to know what it looks like. And even what it feels like. So we know, like a gauge, like the car gauge, you can watch the fuel go up and down and you know when to refuel. But for us personally, if you don't know what compassion looks like or what it feels like, then you don't know that gauge of, I've gone way too far down. My well is empty. I need to refill, or so that you don't get to that point of, I am completely depleted. That's the point that we want to avoid first and foremost, is becoming depleted.
I think that's such a great analogy. Yes, the car gauge, I love it. Yeah, it's so. Yeah, you need to keep a little handle on where you are in your own life, and that's part of self-compassion, right? How am I feeling today?
Right.
What do I need to nurture myself a little bit today? And I think that's so great. I love the car gauge idea because it's so visual, right?
Right. I've had other people
do a
tell me
little chart.
the a water well, like when your well is too low, then you have to reach deeper and deeper for to get more water, and each time you're pulling your bucket back up with less and less water, basically. But to me, the visual of that fuel gauge is like, that's something well, maybe not children, but as adults, it's something we all do. We drive around, we run, to and from work, to and from running errands. And what is the things we have to keep an eye on is that gauge, because either you have it where you're keeping a focus on that gauge and you're knowing how much you can do, how far you can go, or you're stranded on the side of the road, which is that point of depletion, waiting for someone to save you. And if you're in a caregiving situation where you're the one that's depleted, now it's you and your loved ones who are on that side of the road with you.
Oh, it's so true. Yes. I couldn't agree with you more. And I love the analogy. I hope that'll resonate with some people.
I hope so too.
One of the other things, this is a really short, super short version of this, but if you're feeling a little depleted, you can close your eyes and you can send love to yourself, right? Or you can think of people in your life that love you. Maybe they're not present with you right now. They could, have passed on, or they could live in another state. But just think of people sending you love. Send yourself love, and that really does fill you up. It's just kind of another quick way to fill yourself up if your gauge is empty, you're feeling a little depleted. Because let's face it, when you're a caregiver, you're giving,
mm-hmm.
and that you're caring for are in pain and sick and facing death, and so they're not usually giving back to you, right?
Right.
I mean, you're doing it because it's the right thing and because you love that. So nobody's filling you up, is what I'm saying. So you have to fill yourself up, and one of the ways you can do that is giving yourself a hug or sending yourself love, imagining people sending you love. And I think that can be very powerful for people that are feeling very depleted.
It is. In fact, I'm glad you said that, because that's one of the things I find myself doing when I'm, my dad's passed already. He's been gone for 3 years, and it's been 3 years, but a lot of times to me, it feels like it's only been, 3 or 4 months ago sometimes. And so when I have those rough days with Mom, I kind of sit and try and find that quiet moment and kind of have a conversation with Dad and tell him what my day's been and what it's been like and what I'm trying to do and what I'm having a hard time with, and it becomes kind of that cathartic moment where I do have that meltdown like you were talking about. And I feel like it's a internal confession. And then once I kind of let that out and through my system, then I can, I guess, reset in some way and not stay in that moment, but find a way to kind of purge it and then go back and kind of talk myself through. I'm not perfect. I'm enough. I can do this. I can only do the best that I can do, and try to give myself some kind of love in that process. So I'm not weighting myself down with more guilt of, I'm not doing this right. I should be doing it this way or that way, or I can't do enough in the hours of the day, or it's just to try to mentally change my focus. Because it is.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So you get some love and support from your dad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, and every now and again, I feel that I don't know, that little pat on the shoulder, and it's like, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, I love that. I do it with my dad. I was very close to my dad. He died suddenly, and he was a real. Since my husband died, he'd been a real sounding board for me for my kid, with my kids. And so I find myself talking to him, in my mind over things that are going on with them, and looking for some love and support. I think that's great. And one thing I want to encourage people to, the point of the Compassion Magic book was to have people share their stories, right? I share my story with the hopes that people will share their story, because when we share our stories, we connect on very meaningful levels, and we nurture each other, and we support each other. And that means compassion means you care about someone without judging them or criticizing them or what they're doing or how they're doing it. You're just there. I'm here to help you, whatever you need, with no judgment or criticism. And if we share our stories, and it would be so powerful, because we are going to connect in meaningful ways when we really, and we have to talk about our vulnerabilities and our, quote, failures. I don't know if they're failures. I don't like that word, but what things that we wish we had done differently. And sometimes when people share, then you'll go, oh, then you feel like, oh, I can share that I didn't handle that exactly right. And I think it's such a relief. We all seem to think everybody's perfect and has these perfect lives, and they're doing better than I am. You look at other caregivers and you're like, oh, wow, they're probably not having meltdowns. Well, of course they are.
Exactly.
But if we share our stories, we become human, and we really do connect with each other and want to support each other instead of judging and criticizing and comparing, right? Which I think is a cultural thing. We are just trained to do that. And so I would encourage people, share your stories with each other. Somebody's going to have to be brave and do it first, right? But
and that's why that's why this is today's conversation. I love that you're sharing your story with me.
Well, thanks, Jessica. And that was the whole point of the book, is share your stories. I share my story, and believe me, it's not always pretty. And I'm not proud of a lot of the things that I did, but I hope people give people permission to open up and share their story. And that's part of self-compassion too, because if we don't share our stories or we don't acknowledge things that we've done, then we can't love ourselves, right? If we kind of pretend we didn't do that, or, and a lot of and this goes back to, I'm kind of doing non sequitur here, but self-compassion is about not criticizing ourselves, right? And judging ourselves. And that's compassion. We do that for others. We offer that to others. But I think that sometimes if you sit, when you share your story, or you talk to other people, there's a little, like almost a film reel in our head about, oh, that was dumb, oh, that was stupid, or you shouldn't have done that, or you're an idiot, or, we have a lot of critical, judgmental messages of ourselves that sometimes we don't even realize we have.
Right.
And so part of that is be aware of that. If you're sharing your story, if someone's sharing their story with you, or you're going through the day and you're having a bad day, pay attention to what you're saying to yourself subconsciously. It's very damaging, and that's part of self-compassion, is to, let those thoughts pass. It's hard to stop them, but don't believe them. Don't invest in them, right? Try to change the messages you're giving yourself. But there's nothing conceited or vain about that.
Oh, no.
You can nurture yourself. And so, be aware. I think we all have a lot of those messages we're not even aware that we say to ourselves. I know I did. I still do, but boy, I really had a lot of them before I became aware.
That's one of the things that I've learned more recently, is that I have that inner critic, and that little inner critic likes to get a little yappy and start telling me what I am doing and not doing right. And that when I take it to that thought process of the right and wrong, then I realized, okay, I had misplaced expectations. And this is something that it's not necessarily, like you said earlier, I don't like the word failure, because that tells me that I did something wrong. And it's not necessarily that I did something wrong. It's just I had misplaced expectations. And so when I hear other stories, I'm able to say, oh, okay, and it does give me an area of comparison, but not to say what's right and wrong. It's to say I'm not alone. They're experiencing the same things. Maybe they have their meltdowns and I have my meltdowns. Maybe theirs are more visual than mine, or vice versa. But when I hear more and more caregivers come forward And they're slowly and gradually coming forward because it's the need for connection is so strong. And it's not just because of what's going on in the world today, but the need for connection for the caregivers to hear from each other and say, okay, I'm going to be okay, especially when there's other caregivers who are further in their journey than I am in mine. I have something to look forward to, or I have someone to see. There is a bright side or the light at the end of the tunnel type of thing. It's so powerful. And so my inner critic gets silenced in some cases, because then I can remember, oh, I remember so-and-so who said they experienced this, and that as well. And so this is normal. So removing those doubts and those expectations of what's right, what's wrong, what's normal, what's not normal. It's especially when you're in that world of dementia, and it seems like we're always comparing what's normal and what's abnormal. And then we start turning that inward. What's normal for us and what's not normal. And it's not helpful. It's not healthy, I guess.
No, I agree. And I think caregiving is very isolating. And if we're embarrassed to say what's going on or what's happening, that we're even isolating ourselves more. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about what's going on, and you're right, 99% of the time what's going on with you and what you tell someone, they'll validate by saying, oh, I've been through that. I know how you feel. Right. I mean, everybody's journey is a little unique, but there are universal pieces of caregiving. Everybody gets overwhelmed. Everybody has bad days. Everybody's probably short-tempered sometimes with the person they're caring for, right? I mean, we all do that. Mm-hmm. So you can unburden yourself when you tell someone, and then they say, yeah, I've been there too. It's like, oh, okay, I'm not so terrible. Right. You know, I can get through this. And I think that's so important, not to isolate ourselves further than we're already isolated as caregivers.
Definitely. And it all wraps it back around as compassion, showing it outwardly and inwardly. And that's this, it's all part of this journey. And it's, in a sense, even past and beyond this caregiving journey is just, it's kind of like what will make the world go round and round and round if we can keep throwing those little pebbles of love out and keep those ringlets going.
I so agree. I think if we're going to get through this pandemic and just all the challenges that we face, we have to be compassionate with each other. That's the key to surviving and thriving.
Absolutely.
I think is compassion and the strong social connections and bonds that creates.
Yeah, and the more we connect with each other on that compassionate level, I believe the more we will see the similarities in each other instead of the differences.
I agree. And when you think about how people got through some of our other great challenges, I mean, my parents were children of the Depression. They went through World War II. We went through the Cold War. And when, they tell you stories of getting through the Depression and World War II with the rationing and, so many other things, it was all about community. They had a real sense of community at the time. They helped each other. Right. They worked together, and I think that's one reason they were called the greatest generation. And interestingly, they didn't forget about that when the crisis was over. My parents and their generation were just so devoted to community service and helping other people. And I think that there's a lot to learn from that for us, the example they have set for us.
Yes, and that's the example that we need to learn and continue to teach our children so that it's never forgotten. It's seen, it's felt, it's lived.
Right, and that's how they got through it, survived and thrived. So it's a little harder right now. Our challenges are harder in the pandemic because you can't go over to your neighbor's house and hug them and visit with them. So we've got a little bit more of a challenge, but I do think it still is about caring and finding ways to help each other through this crisis.
True. I agree. Well, Virginia, thank you for taking the time to share your story of compassion with me. I hope others will hear this and be inspired to share their stories as well and know that there is no right or wrong in a story. There is no good or bad. It's just expression, and it's showing compassion in a way that shows love for others. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you, Jessica. No, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to, connect with you and with, I hope, people that listen to this. And let's share our stories and let's build some strong connections with each other to support each other.
So for the others that are interested in finding your book, where is the best place to find your book? For The Compassion Magic, Turning Tragedy into Triumph is the first one, and then the second one with Superhero Sam. Where do they find your books?
So they both were on Amazon. There's been a problem with Amazon, I guess, with the pandemic right now with some books. They're not considered priority, which I totally get. Mm-hmm. So Compassion Magic you can find on barnesandnoble.com. The publisher, Hugo House Publishers. Superhero Sam Saves His Family is still available on Amazon, but also on Barnes & Noble. And you can just punch the title into Amazon. It'll pop up, or the same with Barnes & Noble, and you can order it, and they'll ship it to you.
Okay.
Through Barnes & Noble, I think might be the best, just because, like I said, Amazon right now is not making books a priority, which is the right policy, I think.
True. Well, I hope that others will reach out and get either or both of the books, because as we had this conversation, I hope this gave you more food for thought. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalazelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.